and I may take over from there. Hi, everybody. So excited that you're here. Thank you for signing up and showing up on time and sharing your mood of the day. I have to say that was one of the sadder word clouds I've seen, but hopefully by the end of this hour together, you'll be one notch up of wherever you came in. So thanks. I personally am feeling, I will say, just a little hot. I'm in the Bay Area. I'm in Oakland. Many of you are probably around here, and it is over 90 degrees. So, you know, we'll get through this, but not exactly what I want to feel mid-October. So happy to be here. I'm Mariah LaFleur. I'm the National Program Lead for Thriving Schools at Kaiser Permanente, and I'll be helping moderate, corral, share this amazing genius of the my co-presenters here on this webinar. So excited to have everybody here. We are starting. We have Luke Anderson, who's with Placer County Office of Education. He's the Senior Director of Prevention and Supports and Services. He is going to be sharing a lot of genius around PBIS Coalition in California. He is deeply involved and going to share a lot of great stuff with us around that. And kind of behind the scenes, answering questions, helping with tech issues, keeping us moving forward, is Audra Casanova, who is in the PBIS Coalition also, and she's the Stanislaus County Office of Education. And then our other esteemed panelist is Elizabeth Cook, who mentioned is in the Midwest, but talks with us and is very plugged into California on a regular basis. She and I speak almost every day. She knows all the ins and outs of what's going on in the state. Elizabeth is with the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and she is the National Advisor for Social Emotional Health with Alliance for a Healthier Generation, and she leads RISE, of which you'll be hearing a lot about. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I think a lot of people know somewhat about PBIS. We'll get to that in a minute, but Elizabeth, I want to hear more about RISE. Can you give us an overview of what RISE is?
Yes, happy to, Mariah. Thank you. And thank you everyone for being here today. I am so excited. Couple of logistical things before I start, because you are all familiar with the Zoom. So the Q&A is enabled, so you can put in questions through the Q&A, and we will do our best to address those as they come in and as appropriate. The chat is not open, and your cameras are not open either. So if you're experiencing Zoom fatigue or you don't feel like being on camera, you are in luck today because you can't be. It's not an option for you. So thanks for asking that question, Mariah. So I'm really excited to talk about RISE, which is something that at Healthier Generation we have created in partnership with Kaiser Permanente. It stands for Resilience in School Environments. And in a nutshell, next slide, please. We believe at Healthier Generation and also at Kaiser Permanente that schools function best when students and staff are happy and healthy, right? We know that the environments that surround students are really important, and a primary driver of that are the adults that spend their days either in person or virtually with our students. And so we partnered to create RISE. Next slide, please. To do exactly this, right? A whole school focus on building students and staff resilience, and improves kind of the life and quality of staff and students in 4 main areas. So we focus on policies that are specific to building resilience. So things like work-life balance for your adults, or trauma-informed policies that can help shape your environments. We also think about practices, right? So what are the individual practices that need to be embedded in order to build a resilient space? The system factors, right? And this is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. How do we systemically implement some of these pieces so that our systems really run in a way that are functional and trauma-informed? And then finally, our environments, right? What does our building look like, feel like, sound like when we walk in the door so that we know we're promoting our best selves as staff, and as well as our students' best selves. So RISE has 4 main outcomes. The first one is around increasing staff job satisfaction and reducing staff stress. And we think about that from a couple of angles. One is around burnout, so just reduction of burnout. We know burnout's really high in the profession. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Also thinking about increasing subjective well-being, so just my own sense of wellness and feeling well. And then finally, this idea of self-efficacy, right? So do I feel like I have the tools I need in order to do my job well? The other goals we have are around improving safety and connectedness and relationships among students and staff, increasing those social and emotional learning skills, not just for our students, but for our staff as well, because we know the more that we can embed and model social emotional learning, the more likely it is that all of us will grow in that area. And then finally, increase efficiency and effectiveness of mental health supports through using good referral pathways and evidence-based interventions. And that, in a nutshell, is RISE.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's so easy and straightforward.
Just simple, just a couple of goals we've got, Mariah.
I look forward to digging in deeper in a moment. First off, I wanted to make an announcement again. These slides will be available afterwards. They actually are available now as well, but we'll send them around afterwards, as well as a recording for the webinar. So stick with us, but everybody who's here will also have access to this afterwards. All right, thanks for that, a quick overview of RISE. I know we'll learn more in a moment. Luke, for the 5 people of the 600 plus we have on who don't know about PBIS, can you give us an overview of PBIS so everyone is starting with a good foundational knowledge?
Absolutely, Mariah, and thank you, Elizabeth, for that overview of RISE. So I am here representing the California PBIS Coalition, and what we do at the coalition is support the implementation of PBIS in schools across California. So we're a network of technical assistance centers made up of county offices of education, nonprofits, and school partners. So let's dive into what PBIS is for all 6 of you that may be new to it here. Most importantly, what we want to think about here when we're thinking about PBIS is, what is the purpose of this? Why do we do this work? And the purpose of PBIS is to make schools more effective and equitable learning environments for all students. And pretty straightforward business here. This is how we do it. Number 1, we make the school environment more predictable. So I like to think about predictable being the same day to day. Can we create a school environment where students can expect a particular response from the adults? The other piece is consistency. And I like to think of consistency as being consistent across the environment, so consistent expectations. And then the hard work, of course, is getting consistency across all the adults on a campus. Next, we want to make it a positive environment. One of the things we know from the research on challenging behavior is that students that have challenging behavior are more likely to come from coercive environments. So we do the opposite of that. We create positive environments. And then lastly, we want to make the school environment as safe as possible. And we don't just mean physically safe for the students, we mean safe for everyone from a physical standpoint and from a psychological standpoint. All right, so that's the magic. The other piece I'll let you in on, a little secret here, is these big features. So this purpose of PBIS, these are really at the heart of all evidence-based practices that support the well-being of adults and kids. So I have this quote here: nearly all problems of human behavior stem from the failure to ensure that people live in environments that nurture their well-being. So our big goal is to make a nurturing environment in the school. All right, so I like to think of this as the 45-minute long PBIS slide. This is part of the gauntlet that we put folks through when we hire new PBIS trainers. I want to remove some of the noise and just talk about a couple of these pieces here. Number 1, PBIS. We're going to make sure that when we're thinking about PBIS, we're going to put student growth and benefit. It's going to be at the center of all decisions. Okay? And we want to make sure that PBIS and that MTSS is for all students, families, and educators. And then we're going to use data to inform all of these decisions. So who needs help? Is the help working? Are our outcomes equitable? Are all students benefiting equally from our school environment and from the practices that we're putting in place? And of course, if we want it to be consistent and we want it to be predictable, we're also going to make sure we have some information on how well we're doing those practices. Cool stuff. Nice long chart here. I started doing PBIS when I was a special education teacher way back in the 2006-07 school year. And what you see in this chart is over time, these are the number of schools that are actively implementing PBIS during a school year. So this doesn't mean that they were trained at some point. These are schools that are actively implementing in that moment. And so we peaked in the 18-19 school year at just over 3,000 in California. So that is over 3 in 10 schools, because we have about 10,000 schools in California. And even last year, with all of the disruption of COVID, we still had over 2,600 schools report data to us indicating that they were doing PBIS. All right, so what does it matter if we do these things? We have a good amount of research that says if you do PBIS, you get all of these outcomes. One we're talking about today, though, is increased perception of teacher efficacy, reductions in burnout, and those staff benefits to PBIS. But just doing PBIS may not be enough to get you those results.
So thanks, Luke. Talked a lot about students and schools overall. Curious why we're spending this time with a staff lens, although I am thinking that word cloud at the beginning may be an indicator. I imagine the 650-ish of you on this, most of you are school and district staff, teachers, et cetera. Elizabeth, can you tell us more about what specifically is going on with staff and why we need to focus on them when we want better school outcomes overall?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think, Mariah, you hit it right on the head, right? So that word cloud in the beginning, right, where these emotions around being tired, exhausted, anxious come up. And we know that that is really impactful to the workforce and the work environment. And we also know, right, that one of the most effective teaching strategies is to have a positive relationship between the adults and the environment and the students that are there. And if the adults aren't feeling very positive, right, about their work environments, about their own self, then the probability that you're going to be able to form those meaningful relationships goes down as you would expect. And so the other thing that I want to talk about here is what Luke talked about in terms of, consistent, predictable, positive, and safe. And part of consistency in education is having an educator that is, there and present, right, in your system. And what we know, in addition to the fact that we're struggling finding educators that are attracted to the field, that educators that come into the field as new educators leave the field at significant rates within the first 5 years of them being there, right? So a new teacher comes in, you're really excited, then you see the job and you're like, oh my gosh, this is really, really difficult. And then they go, which just causes disruption in our learning environment. And deeper than that, if you want to dig deeper in terms of why folks leave, right? Here they are. So this is a working paper that came out from University of Pennsylvania. And what they find is, sure, there's some folks that leave the field for retirement, right? Or maybe for financial reasons, you don't become an educator because you want to be a millionaire. But a primary reason why folks leave the field is because they're dissatisfied. And when you really unpack that dissatisfaction, there's kind of a couple of prongs there. An important one is around student behavior management, right? And the difficulty managing classrooms, the difficulty managing the emotional stress and burden that comes with caretaking for students who may be struggling quite a bit. And so the more that we can support teachers in feeling like they are able to perform in their environments, the more we're going to see that dissatisfaction number come down, and the more likely it is that we'll retain staff, which is exactly what we need and what we want. More than that, the data shows, and this comes out of the Nation of Hope report from the Aspen Institute, which if you haven't read it, highly recommend it, that we know that if we develop staff social emotional health, it not only improves their own well-being, but it also improves student learning, right? So like what I said at the beginning, we know that having that positive relationship between the adults and the environment and the student is really impactful for student growth and learning. And when we're not feeling our best selves, we're not able to form those relationships as effectively. So again, we're going to reduce stress, burnout, and staff turnover by building up those social emotional skills in our staff. And then we'll see gains across the board. So here's what I always like to say about this, right? Because this is like really nice lip service, right? Great. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I know I'm supposed to be well, and to me, this is really a team approach. And this is why I'm really excited about teaming up here with Luke and PBIS. Because this idea of sort of sharing space, right? We're all educators, we're all in it together. This idea of sharing space is sort of the beginning. And then the question is, how do you keep yourself together once you're there, right? We just saw the data in terms of people leaving, right? How do you keep your family of educators together, right? And make progress. But this last one is the key to me. And this is really about systemic implementation of some of these strategies, which is where we're going to talk about today, because no one does systemic implementation better than PBIS, in my opinion, right? Is how do we work together in concert with each other to find success around this particular idea and concept of staff well-being. I just gave a presentation a minute ago, where I talked about really doing a staff well-being strategy well is an innovation like anything else you'd think about, right? An SEL curriculum, a math curriculum, right? To do it well, you have to be thoughtful, planful, and systemic in order to make it work well. And Luke and I are going to talk to you about how to make that happen. Oh, but before I do that, one more slide, thanks. Elements of a resilient workplace. So like I said, I went on my wax philosophically about systems, but we know that systems matter, right? So the systems that are around you matter. We talk about personal factors quite a bit, right? So, do I feel like I have control and agency? Am I able to compartmentalize and sort of move in and out of my life boxes in a meaningful way? And does our work have meaning and purpose? And so those are kind of personal factors. And then there's also the leadership factors. So, if you're a leader yourself on this call, or you can think about your building principals or admins that are surrounding you, leaders that focus on psychological safety, that have really clear and consistent communication and real visible follow through, tend to promote our own well-being, right? When we trust our leaders and we sort of can predict where they're going to go and there's no surprises there, again, you're going to see this theme of consistency and predictability come up quite a bit. We tend to be happier in our workplaces. And then finally, the systems factors, and the research really supports this, and this should look really familiar to you, this idea of consistent, predictable, positive, and safe within your work environment, right? So when my work environment has no surprises for me, when I know that predictably, if a student behavior happens, a predictable response happens, right? If I need support and help, there's a predictable pattern there and how that support happens. Those are all things that help us settle into our system so that when we walk in the doors, we can say, okay, I know that this is a safe place for me to work. I feel really good here. I'm living my purpose, and I can really dig in to the hard work of teaching children.
This sounds good, Elizabeth. And it all sounds really positive and nice in theory. I'm thinking about a school, many probably that are on this webinar, that is implementing PBS and wants to think specifically, how can I do this tomorrow? Can you give me a specific example of what this looks like and how I can do this in my real life today?
Yeah, well, we got one for you, Luke. Get us started.
All right, so I know that you are all here because you want to hear what does this look like for a school. So I don't know much about your school, but I do know a little bit about a lot of schools. So what I want you to do here is you can put your own school hat on, or you can dive into our fictional school here, appropriately named Sample High School. So imagine you are a member of Sample High School and you are on their PBIS leadership team. You're a school that has been doing PBIS for a few years, you're at your third year of implementation, and you have at your disposal these teams that you can use to address not only your important social, emotional, behavioral, and academic outcomes for students, but start to think about how do we support the needs of the adults as well. So we have kind of our tier 1 team, and then we have that intervention team. So those things are happening. Now, imagine that team said, you know what, we want to focus on staff wellness because our data is telling us that that's something important. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at how these PBIS systems that you already have in place can be leveraged to do this really important work and benefit from the resources that the RISE folks have. Of course, you're a PBIS school, so we have the obligatory triangle in here. And these are these same tier 3 supports that you would have in place for your students. So I'll just point out one there, that tier 3 strategy Renew is one that's becoming increasingly popular across California for high schools. And then we won't dive into the tier 1 and tier 2 practices other than that we are going to have your values, you're going to define those, you're going to teach them, and then you're going to acknowledge them. Those are those big ones. All right, so you've identified staff wellness as a thing that you would like to improve. Your tier 1 team then can use the RISE resources, so the RISE Index and the Action Center, and dive into those and find some of these pieces. So you've done that. And as a team, one of those practices is gratitude. So we're going to look at that specifically as we move forward here today.
All right, so there it is. So part of the RISE initiative involves an assessment that we created in partnership with Kaiser Permanente, as well as with a lot of feedback from experts in the field of comprehensive school mental health and social emotional health and schools. And we developed this index that really pinpoints some of the best practices in building a resilient school. And the question that you see in front of you, SWB2, comes from the staff well-being section. We have an entire section of 10 questions dedicated specifically towards building staff well-being practices, kind of in and of itself. And so SWB2 is this question: to what extent does your school provide opportunities for staff to recognize accomplishments and display gratitude? Now, it may seem a little bit like, well, gratitude, is that like really a thing? Is that really, you know, is that fluffy? But the truth is the research is pretty clear, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, that a gratitude practice is really important evidence-based practice, not only for your own well-being, but actually to improve the culture and climate of the folks around you. So this is what you've chosen from the RISE Index, and Luke is going to talk about then how that translates to PBIS action planning.
All right, so good news. We're seeing these practices that are clearly spelled out here. And one of the things that I'm just going to do as we go here is just do some reminding and prompting here. So what we don't want you to do is say, oh, something that's new but looks like something I already know, and then think about it in a totally different way. So we have our staff well-being item here. And what you can do with this is you can apply that same problem solving and that same action planning logic that you did for your PBIS development. So you can see here a sample action plan for PBIS. So TFI item 1.3, which is our teaching of our skills. So we might say, well, Luke is going to integrate some wellness activities into our PBIS matrix, and it becomes an action item when we say, who's going to do it, Luke, and by when, December 1st, 2020. And because I am a seasoned PBISer, I know that Elizabeth is my team member with wellness expertise, and she missed the meeting, so I'm going to assign her an action item as well. So here's our specific PBIS one.
Classic move, Luke. Thanks.
we try to do our best to be helpful here. So here's what we're going to say from those great strategies in the RISE Index. So same thing. We're going to look at the specific activity we want to do. We're going to look at what are the key pieces that need to be in place to do that. All right. Well, one thing that I know we're going to learn a little bit more about is if we're going to do this gratitude work, we're going to have to get a little bit of information from our staff. So from an action item, from a next step perspective, we might say we're going to administer the gratitude survey at our next staff meeting. And of course, it'll become an action plan when we say who, Elizabeth, our wellness lead, and when she'll do it. And we'll give her that same due date of 12/1. All right.
Great. So Luke is absolutely right that assessing gratitude styles is one really important aspect of really building sustainable gratitude into your system. We have a resource that I will share with you towards the end of this call around how to really implement gratitude in a way that is meaningful within your system and sustainable. And there's 4 main components to it. The first is to provide professional development or professional learning on what gratitude is, right? In the same way that we wouldn't expect students to be able to know how to do something without teaching, we're also going to think about the same thing from our staff perspective, right? Sort of gratitude is this idea that floats in the air, but to really root ourselves in the evidence behind it and have folks really understand what it is really important if we want them to do it and do it well. Then we're going to assess some gratitude styles, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, and we're going to do our own little assessment here. From there, you pick a strategy, right? You find your data and you align that data with a specific gratitude strategy to implement, and then you monitor and adjust to make sure that it's effective, right? Just like any of our practices, it's not enough to do the thing. You also have to determine whether or not the thing that you're doing is effective and then make those adjustments. So here we go, sample school. If you're ready to dig in, we'll do step 1, which is teach. So we're going to learn a little bit about the science of gratitude. So gratitude actually is a 2-part definition, which I don't think we talk about quite as much. The first step of gratitude, the first component of it, is just noticing goodness, right? So noticing things around you in the world that are good. So I have a window right here. I can look out the window and my backyard happens to have a tree, right? That's a good thing. It's nature. It feels good. You know, Luke is doing a good job presenting and bringing the PBIS component, right? That's a good thing that I'm just noticing. I'm not labeling as anything other than a good thing. That's part 1. Part 2 then is recognizing that that source of goodness is actually outside yourself. Like you didn't do that. I didn't plant this tree out here, right? I didn't create it. It just exists. Luke is awesome. I have no hand in making him awesome. He just is a person who happens to be great. And that what it does is it brings this concept of like a sense of awe and a sense of wonder. And that's then how you root yourself in gratitude. Next slide, please. So that's what gratitude is. Great. So you may be saying, okay, Elizabeth, but like, why do it? And I like to say this because I'm a school psychologist by training, and I am like not a very touchy-feely person. I'm a very sort of rooted in data person. I'm a high fiver, not a hugger. My mom actually is a social worker, and so her and I have this really great back and forth about sort of she brings the feels and I bring the data, and so sort of together we make a holistic human. So I like to be rooted in the data. And so this is what the research says. This comes out of UC Berkeley, Greater Good Science Center, which if you're not familiar with them, highly recommend you engage in their resources. But that when people consistently practice gratitude, a few things happen. One is personal, right? Your sense of general happiness and life satisfaction tends to increase. You also tend to have a decrease of some of those negative feelings, right? Stress, sadness, anxiety, all of those things, because you're focusing on the goodness of the world and recognizing that, you know, goodness exists outside yourself. You're not responsible for all that is good in the world. There's also this other impact that happens, and that actually has to do with other people. When you have a consistent gratitude practice, you build stronger connections with your own peers, right? This is why we talk about it systemically from the purposes of implementing it in your school, because if we want to increase positive culture and climate, we need to have a consistent gratitude practice to bring those stronger connections. And then as it turns out, people are more helpful and generous when they're practicing gratitude. So you're more likely to help out or to step up, right? Or to feel more generous about the world around you, which I don't know about you, but I think that is a good thing. We could use more helpfulness and more generosity in the world.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. Hopefully I timed that transition okay. Let me know I can go back. Good. Okay. So here's the good news again from our PBIS work is we already know how to teach these kinds of skills. So what I want you to think about as you're exploring the RISE strategies or you're exploring these wellness activities, when you're teaching those skills, you can do it in the same way that you teach your behavioral skills in PBIS. So you connect it to your school-wide expectations or values. Also probably a good time to look at those values and take a quick audit and do those values support wellness. You're going to define it, and then you're going to explicitly define or elicit a response as why wellness or gratitude might be important. So that's going to get folks to buy into that. Then, just like we do in our PBIS work, you're going to teach these skills through examples and non-examples. So we all know how to kind of do behavioral skills, examples and non-examples. When we start to get into these things more like gratitude and ways of thinking, we can use a lot of that same logic, but we just do think alouds. So here's a way that I could be thinking about something that I'm grateful for. Elizabeth just shared a number of great examples of what that looks like. And then also some non-examples. One of the things that Elizabeth's been really generous with sharing with me is just some of those nuances with gratitude. And then if you overdo it in some ways, you can actually do a little bit of the opposite in terms of impact. You get a little bit of harm. So we want to set those boundaries. What does this look like to do it right? And then what does it look like to do it not quite right, where we might not get those great examples, and then provide some immediate feedback. So we do this with kids. The question is, does it work with adults? I won't go into it today, but if you're following along the slides when you get them later, There is a video here. In fact, I'm going to, well, I won't grab it yet. I'll grab it in a second and post it in the chat of our agency, Placer County Office of Education, teaching COVID-related wellness skills to our staff using these PBIS strategies. And I won't speak for any other agencies, but I can say that after going through this work and teaching, and we use videos to do it, we've had really great examples of folks engaging in these COVID safety behaviors, like wearing a mask and social distancing and cleaning properly. So you have a lot of these skills. We just want to remind you that you have them and take advantage of those things you already know. And again, I'll make sure that link gets into the chat before we go today.
Great, thank you, Luke. And we're going to talk in a little bit about some of the implementation errors around gratitude. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because there is a way to do it in a way that causes harm, or at the very least is not as effective as you want it to be. So step 2 is assess, and Luke already talked about this. This is my action item for December, which I'm very excited to do now ahead of schedule, things that have never happened ever, 2 months ahead of schedule on an action item. And so what do we mean by assess? Next slide, please. Well, the way that we conceptualize this at Healthier Generation, and this is born out in some ways from the research, is this idea that gratitude sort of comes in a couple of different buckets. You can think about them as buckets. I like to think about them as a spectrum, which is, how do you like to receive it, right? Are you a person that really likes things being loud and in public, or are you like more like a private person? Are you a person who really likes words, right, or stuff? Or are you a person who really more appreciates when someone does something on your behalf, right? Helps you, navigate technology, or sets up something for you, or helps you clean your classroom. And so it's really important for us to get a sense of where our own preferences are, and the preferences of others. And the reason for that is because what happens is, if you do a gratitude practice that's a mismatch to how people like to receive gratitude, then what ends up happening is that it doesn't resonate with them, right? It doesn't kind of sit as something that was an experience of gratitude. Let me give you a personal example. I am not a big public recognition kudos person. I get really embarrassed. I get really put on the spot. And so my organization, one of the strategies that we do for gratitude is that our all staff meetings, we have this sort of moment where you can kind of do little shout outs for people or whatever else. And for me, that's like stuff and nightmares. Like the idea of somebody coming off mute and being like, let me tell you about how Elizabeth was great at whatever. It makes me feel uncomfortable. It makes me feel embarrassed. And it doesn't hit my brain in a way that says, wow, that was really wonderful and really great. Now, conversely, there are people out there in the world that that's like what they hang on to, and they get really excited about that, and that hits their brain in a different way. Me, I'm a stuffs person. I like stuffs and I like notes. That's me. Private and things is kind of the buckets that I sit in. And so it's really important to know that, so that we can vary our gratitude practices and our implementation, so that we make sure that we're hitting things the way that we want to hit them. So we're going to do this today. I'm going to do my action item. Next slide, please. And we would like for you to do a poll for us, right? How do you like to receive gratitude? You have the option of selecting more than one. So you don't, if you're worried about, I don't know, like I can't bucket myself, no problem, right? Think about yourself and think about what you like. Luke, what do you like? Do you have a gratitude style?
I like any and all forms is my my gratitude choice.
So you like when I called you awesome on a webinar with 700 people on it? That felt that good? Good.
That was borderline.
Mariah, how do you like gratitude?
I have to say, I like to receive gratitude in like a note and gift, maybe private, but actually when I realize I show gratitude for others, I do it in acts of service. So I don't know if it's common that I give it in a certain way, but I like to receive it in a different way.
Yeah. I like to, for those of you who are partnered, I like to always do this activity with your partner. So my husband, Tyson, is an acts of service person. That's what he does. And so he just like does things around the house, or like things will just show up because I had mentioned them once, and then like a Prime box comes and it was like, you think you needed things. And for the longest time, I was like, well, you never say anything nice. And he's like, well, I do all these nice things. And I was like, oh yeah, that's because like we're passing each other. This is good for us to know so that I can stop giving you a hard time about how you never say anything nice to me. All right, I think we're ready to show the poll results here. And almost like a beautiful bell curve there, look like a nice curve. The majority of the folks on the call like notes and gifts, some private recognition, a little less on the public recognition and acts of service space. And this is about typical for a spread. So we've done this quite a bit with a number of schools, and you do get this variation. So it's really uncommon for like everybody to like one style of thing. And so this is why it's important for us to think about this so that we can vary our strategies. So Luke, what are we going to do with our data?
All right, so good news is we now have a pretty good sense on overall as a group of our 650 staff here at Sample High School. We know that notes and gifts is the form of gratitude that is the most common. So as we're planning our gratitude, we can say that's probably a good place to start, and we're going to get a good chunk of our staff. But one of the things that I know, having worked at a number of school sites, is not all staff are at the same level of risk for burnout. And one of the things that I've seen a lot of my work, and I think this is borne out in the research as well, is that oftentimes our special education teachers are at higher risk for burnout. They tend to not make it to that 5-year point that Elizabeth was showing us with the attrition rates. They're much more likely to leave early. They're more likely to experience burnout. So if I'm that team at the school, and I know that we shouldn't do anything with one level of intensity, and we should be looking for some folks that need a little bit more, I might say, gosh, I know, in my own personal experience, I know from talking to folks that our special education teachers are at higher risk. And so I might look a little deeper into our data, and I might find out that even though as a group, gifts and notes is the most common form of gratitude folks would like, that for those guys and girls or ladies, that they may actually like acts of service, right? Just come in and help me affirm and attest to my IEP. That's what I need. So what I want you to think about here is you're your school. We have this data. We know notes and gifts is the highest. We know private recognition is the second highest. We know the acts of service is the third highest, and public recognition is the fourth highest. I want you to think about not just what are you going to do for all staff, but how are you going to target your gratitude practices or your wellness practices. So think about it for our sample special education staff there. And then I also want you to think about, what about those 1 or 2 staff at your site that are really feeling it? So maybe they've got external factors that are contributing to their stress and their burnout. Maybe they have something going on at home that is contributing to it. Maybe they just happen to have that class this year that is really challenging. What could we do for them? And I'm just going to pause and stop talking. I just want you to think about, how would you use this multi-tiered logic to meet those needs? All right, go ahead and keep thinking here for a sec. All right, so here's some thoughts that I had as I was thinking about these same questions. Number one is, I know some folks are going to need more, so I don't want to just be the sole contributor of gratitude and for my staff. I'm going to create some systems where folks have an opportunity to acknowledge each other. And for my folks that might need a little bit more, I'm going to put a little more energy into that. I might engage my larger special education staff in the district around, hey, we need to engage because our folks need a little bit more. So we may do some of that, and I may do some targeted gratitude with those folks that are need a little bit more gratitude. So as a person that holds that knowledge, I might say, I know this person's at risk, and I know for that particular person, they really appreciate private recognition. I was in my colleague's cubicle today eating my lunch because somebody's using my office, and I realized that she had kept notes from all of her colleagues, and it was pasted all around her office. So I now know that for her, if I needed to provide some targeted gratitude, that's probably something that's going to work. And then for my few staff that need even more, I'm going to really have to pull on all of my resources to provide that and acknowledge that our general strategies may not be enough for them. So I don't want to keep changing my general strategies because it wasn't enough for my few staff that needed a lot more. I just need to make sure that those folks are provided a lot more. So that's the way we want you to think about them, this gratitude and the wellness strategies as you're moving forward here.
Great, thank you, Luke. So like Luke said, right, we're going to think about what our data shows us. We're going to think about the nuances of our staff within a particular thing, and then we're going to pick a strategy or several strategies. Now in the resource that I shared, we have some strategies laid out for you. So if you just want to go through the next slide, where you can see, here's some examples of public recognition, here's some examples of private recognition. If you go to the next slide, access service, I think, is the one that can sometimes feel a little bit like, what is that, right? So we think about things like a duty takeover or like a space saver, right? Maybe I come in and I clean your desk for you, because I know that that's important to you and that's something that's more difficult. In this time of virtual world, right, I help you set up your technology, right, or I take some kind of burden off of you. So regardless of what strategy or strategies you pick, the way you implement them matters. And so what's really important here is to know that the opportunities should be formal, right, so that they should be regular and consistent and actually embedded into what you do. That you want to be respectful of staff time. So if something that you pick happens before or after school and that doesn't work for your staff, they're not going to feel appreciated. They're going to feel obligated, right? And then back to what Luke was talking about in terms of not being useful and causing harm, you have the potential to do that. The really important thing here is that it needs to be authentic. So it needs to feel and be authentic to the staff that are there. So like if Starbucks is not the thing for your school staff, then getting Starbucks gift cards doesn't meet the need, right? It doesn't meet that authenticity. And then finally has to be ongoing, sort of one and done with gratitude. It doesn't work very well. And it tends to kind of put people in a place where they feel like, oh, well, that happened one time. There must be some reason. You must want something from me because you did this once and I've never heard from you again.
Okay, so as you're planning these gratitude activities, big scary slide here. Most important thing I want you to think about is if you're following along is there's a link up here and it's to the recognition worksheet. So generalize these skills you already have. These are the types of recognition worksheets we use to organize how we acknowledge youth and students. And you can, of course, apply this to adults. So define your gratitude system, define it. So what is it that we are going to consider gratitude at our school site? Who's responsible for providing gratitude? Is it just one person or is it everyone? Who will receive it? Right? So how are we going to ensure that that happens? Define maybe a gratitude schedule. So have some time. So Elizabeth talked about it at their staff meetings. They have a time, they have a chance to provide this gratitude. And that's something we've had a lot of success with in our department. Link that gratitude to your survey results. And then, of course, define when you're going to teach how this is all going to work.
So I'm, the chair of the gratitude committee at Sample High School, and we have spent weeks putting this system into place. We did the survey. We're doing acts of service and gift cards, and we are just going to town. But how do I know if it's working? How do I know if people are actually hearing it and feeling appreciated? I'm a little worried that this work is all for nothing.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chair. Thank you very much. This is why this idea of continuous quality improvement, monitoring, adjusting, database decision making, right? All the great things that we do for kids in our problem solving applies also to what we do with adults. So in the gratitude resource that I shared, this is the way that we conceptualize that in broad strokes based on results-based accountability. And so the broad questions you want to ask yourself is like, how much did you do, right? What did you do? who was engaged in it, right? So, you know, how did that go? Then how well did it go, right? Was it sustained? Who participated? Does staff like it? Do they feel satisfied with what they did? And then to me, this goes to the big question, which Luke is going to address in a second, is anyone better off? Because to be satisfied with something doesn't necessarily mean that it translates to this sort of long-term sense of wellness or well-being. So you really want to root yourself back to that big goal around burnout and reducing burnout and reducing stress.
All right, so here we are, we're Sample High School. We have these great elements in place, thinking about those outcomes that we value: social competence, academic achievement, wellness. And then because we're a PBIS site, we're gonna focus on those data pieces, and we're gonna think about it just like Elizabeth said, that we're gonna think about the extent to which we're implementing those and also their impact. And if we think way back to that MTSS slide early on, one of the core foundations is this focus on student outcomes. So what we, in an ideal world, what we want to do is be able to monitor the impact on staff and the impact that students and our community at the same time. So I just wanted to leave you with just one more resource, and that is the PBIS School Climate Survey. So there's a student version, there's a family version, and then there's a school personnel version. There's a link to it. And a couple of neat things about this. Number one is there's those 3 different surveys, so we can give it to those different stakeholder groups. The other thing it allows us to do is we can disaggregate those data. So we can say, are these adjustments we're making, are all students, are all families, are all of our school personnel benefiting? Because we can disaggregate that. We can look at that by race and ethnicity. We can look at that by gender. And we can really get a great handle on, are we seeing an improvement in these valued outcomes? So there's a link to it there. We'll talk a little bit at the end here about just some of the local PBIS centers. I can get connected with those folks because we have the ability to input all of that data into the PBIS assessments application, and then you can disaggregate it and get your beautiful charts that your team needs to make those important decisions.
All right, so this is your opportunity here. So take out your phone or take out your snipping tool on your computer, or kind of whatever your sort of preferred technology moment is right now, and take a picture of this and share it with somebody. It can be a colleague, it can be a family member, it can be a friend, it can be yourself, right? So I'm grateful for you, me, because of all of these things, for showing up today, or whatever you want to be grateful for. And so if you could just take a minute to do that. And while you're doing that, I will share, and I think I'm speaking for Luke as well, that we are incredibly grateful for you showing up today. This is an incredibly stressful time, which is an understatement, right? If you're an educator or in the business of caring and serving children. And so we are incredibly grateful that you took time out today to hear us talk about this, and are really hopeful that you found something useful out of it. All right, before we go into Q&A, we would be remiss to not mention, next slide, please, that when we're talking about sort of sustainable gratitude practice, right, so a culture of gratitude or even a personal gratitude, even though we can think about tiering those things the way that Luke said, which is a really great idea, that is not a replacement for folks that are in acute distress, right, where there's immediate needs. And so I want to really point out a couple of really important strategies around immediate needs for folks that are really experiencing really disruptive stress and anxiety during this time. So one is your employee assistance program. This is a slide that we have generously borrowed from Kaiser Permanente, describing what an EAP is. Nearly all educational insurance places carry them now, so most of you should have one. And many EAPs offer really great services and have increased their services in the time of COVID. So increased mental health services, increased financial assistance, as well as, for example, if you're a Kaiser Permanente member, you get access to the Calm app for free, and some other really, really great apps that can help you kind of stay sort of balanced in this time. The other thing that I want to share for all of us as a reminder, next slide, please, is that if you are in real stress right now, that there is the National Suicide Prevention Hotline there. You can also do the text chat with Lifeline, and it'll connect you with somebody that can get you help rapidly and right away and provide you a space to be able to talk about that and seek help. So, please, if you're struggling or if you know someone else is struggling, please reach out and be supportive of one another. We're all in this together. It's an incredibly difficult time right now. And so the more we can keep eyes and ears on each other, the better off we'll be collectively.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth and Luke. That was so much great information. I want to zoom back out for a moment on back to RISE and PBIS. We have lots more coming from both of these interventions. On the left-hand side, you'll see 2 RISE specific webinars we have end of this month and then early November. One is just an overall welcome to RISE. And we will put the registration link into the chat so people have it there as well. These are long. And then in the first week of November, we also have leveraging RISE to support staff resiliency and well-being. So to spend some more time with us learning about RISE, please register and attend those. And then also the PBIS Coalition in March has their annual spring conference, which is actually right around the corner, surprisingly, and access your regional TA center for PBIS, and that's their website there. So we'll put those links in the chat as well. We do have a moment to take a couple of questions. Thank you for asking throughout this presentation and being involved and active. One, I would say kind of, I don't know, maybe straightforward question we're hearing. We've heard a couple of requests, Elizabeth or Luke, for, is there a specific gratitude survey you can recommend that we use for staff? I think people are excited to go and replicate this in their own schools.
Yeah, so we don't, I don't have like a sort of like, formal evidence-based one. We have in the gratitude toolkit that I shared a survey that you can do with staff. It's really low tech. You can either do it paper and pencil, or you can throw it in like Google Forms or kind of whatever your preferred thing of choice is, and then have your staff do that. We recommend it being that way just because it's easier, it's quicker, it's not as heavy of a lift. And in a world where, appropriately so, we assess quite a bit, we want to make this as easy and open as possible for folks. And so, yep, you can access that in the resource.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I also want
to
just provide a quick prompt. I know Audra's done a lot of work in this, so Audra, just feel free to turn your camera on and jump in on these conversations. And I'll make one quick plug on the that final link there on the last slide for the regional centers for PBIS, for the California PBIS Technical Assistance Center. Those are the links to get in touch of the Luke and the Audras of the world, and it's regionalized. So we'll get you in contact with whoever is geographically closest to you. So great resource there.
Thanks, Luke. I know we've been getting lots of questions in the chat about issues accessing the links. Some of them have put into the chat. We tried to put all of them in there, but it's moving quickly. We will send an email with the full slides and links to all of the things that we have linked to afterwards. And we'll say, for this, go here, for this, go there. So you could share and use and access all of that. And one more note on all the RISE resources. I think a few people wanted to go directly to the resource. You do have to create a free Action Center account if you don't already have one. Again, this is totally free. You are not put in 1,000 email lists, but we do like to know kind of who is accessing all the RISE resources. So it takes 30 seconds, type in your email, click the school or district you're affiliated with, and you can access everything that we talked about related to RISE. So I encourage you to create an Action Center account if you don't already have that.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to plug, I think there are some questions that are coming up on the chat box around some interconnected concepts, right? So, thinking about some of the concepts around Gallup and strengths and subjective well-being, some things around moral injury and trauma-informed care pieces. And I would say kind of as we orient RISE in general, we try to root ourselves in those interconnections between good trauma-informed care practices, good subjective well-being practices, right? So those personal pieces and then these collective pieces in addition to a variety of strategies. And so what you saw here today was a real narrow dive into one particular strategy, but happy to come back and sort of chat about the linkages between multi-tier system supports and some of the other elements and how those things interconnect together and play off and reinforce each other so that we're really driving towards having an effective environment where teachers are living their purpose and students are really feeling supported.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We had someone who went to a RISE presentation this week and last week, so sounds like we're in a few different places. Thanks for engaging with us. The question was, we have referenced people to help implement RISE and look at data, virtual people. It says, who are the people and how can I get in touch with the RISE people? Elizabeth?
Yes, so actually one of them is on this call right now. Yasemin Corzo is our virtual content manager. She's on my team and is wonderful. And if we had the ability for her to chat or come off video, I would call her out. But we have real people that do these things. So if you sign up for an account in the Action Center, you can hit a button that says, I need help, and it will take you right to a number and an email. You can call it an email and someone will reach out to you in a really short turnaround time to say, hey, what do you want? We can help support with technical assistance. We can help support with professional learning opportunities, sharing resources, lots of different options out there. But we are real people behind the screen. You won't get any robo responses from us.
Good to know. And then I'm going to repost the slides again, the link to the PBIS Coalition website. The links to everything we've talked about are that have shown up in the PowerPoint will show up there as well. And then I just wanted to give one last pause. I know Audra has done a lot of work around RISE and PBIS and holding both of those hats. And I just wanted to just give you a second if there was anything that you thought for schools that are doing this work, either starting with RISE or starting with PBIS and really wanting to connect these systems and make the most efficient, effective system possible. How would you go about that?
I think my recommendation would be to go slow to go fast. And so just like today, we've really made some small connections with just starting one practice, the gratitude practice, specifically in supporting staff and integrating that into your PBIS systems. I would definitely just take it slow and try to, take it one by one, take one practice, get really good at it, and, support staff and students in that way. So, pick one thing, get good at it, and then continue to build on that. Thank you, Luke.
Awesome. And there was looks like a request too for the school climate survey, and the link may not have worked. So I will grab that in 1 second. And then just again, know that to really benefit from the school climate survey and those type of tools, just get in contact with your regional center through the PBIS Coalition, and then we can connect you with the program that's no cost to deliver and run the reports for that survey.
Great. And I also put in the chat, I think, a link to Alexis Lassus, who is our virtual program manager. She has a lovely Microsoft booking page. It's like booking a haircut, if you can remember a time where you used to book a haircut to do a thing, where you can go in and you can make an appointment with her. So that's like an even faster line than what I gave you before. So thanks, Yasemin, for pinging me on the side and sharing that. So there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Luke and Audra from PBIS, Elizabeth from Healthier Generation, everybody in the back end who helped make this happen, all of you who came and spent some time with us. We will be sending you a resource-rich follow-up email with links to everything RISE, everything PBIS, slides from this presentation and the recording. So please stay tuned for that to share far and wide. And with that, have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. I believe it's Thursday today. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you, Mariah. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Bye.
Rachel, Annie. Thank you very much for coming.